Without any further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you all to Oliver Fairclough, who, of course, most of you know him already. Oliver is an honorary research fellow at Cymru, the National Museum Wales in Cardiff, where he worked from 1986 to 2015, initially as an assistant keeper for ceramics, silver, and craft, and then as keeper of art. He is a member of the French Porcelain Society since 1987 and a founding journal editor. Oliver was our chairman, as you probably know, from 2015 until only last year, and he is currently researching a book on the life and collections of Sir Watkin Williams-Wynn, his subject this evening. Welcome, and over to you, Oliver.
Thank you very much, Felix. It's a great pleasure to be asked to give this lecture, and lovely to see the FPS going from strength to strength in this last extraordinary year. I'm going to talk this evening about the silver and porcelain bought between 1770 and 1775 by Sir Watkin Williams-Wynn, who you see here in a terracotta bust, now in the National Gallery in Dublin, made by the Irish sculptor Christopher Hewitson in Rome in 1769. In many respects, mine is a typical story of 18th century extravagance, but there are a few things about Sir Watkin that make him unusual. He was extraordinarily rich. Late 18th century newspapers sometimes published rich lists, and he's always one of the 50 or so people in Britain named. He became very rich very young because his father died when he was a baby. He was deeply interested in the arts and saw himself as a connoisseur and a man of taste. The bust here is one of many works he commissioned during a grand tour of France and Italy in 1768 and 1769. He was Welsh rather than English. Did that make a difference? Many of the paintings and art objects that belong to him are now in museums across the English-speaking world. However, the largest group of them is in Cymru National Museum Wales, where I used to work. And that's appropriate because he was perhaps the greatest patron of the arts that Wales has ever produced. Lastly, and perhaps most important, he's extraordinarily well documented because not only his estate archive survives, but also his personal accounts from the 1770s and many of his bills. And from those, we know that Williams-Wynn was to spend several £1,000s on porcelain and silver during this short 5-year period of 1770 to 1775. He's known a bit to silver historians, but he also acquired a good deal of European porcelain, hence this lecture tonight, which included Sèvres tablewares and biscuit figures. And I reckon that his purchases throw some light on some broader questions as well. For example, what was the relative esteem and cost of porcelain as opposed to silver in the second half of the 18th century? Were there broader aesthetic considerations? Did purchasers seek to integrate their tablewares visually, for example, by colour or motif, with the interior architecture of their dining rooms? Also, men like Sir Watkin spent about half the year in London and had a house there, as well as others on their estates. They were not carting their ceramics around with them, but were similar wares used both in London and in the country. Who chose what was bought? It's sometimes thought that this was a matter of gender, but is that true? Also, Sir Watkin was a younger contemporary of people like the 6th Earl of Coventry, whose purchases of Sèvres porcelain were explored by Ros Saville in the 5th French Porcelain Society Journal. Why were European and especially French porcelains to be found on the elite table in Britain at this date? Was it just aristocratic francophilia, or was it partly that Britain and France were actually at peace for about 15 years at this point? So here is Sir Watkin at the age of 19, painted with his mother by Sir Joshua Reynolds. And as you can see, he's quite stout and he's got red hair. He's standing literally at the threshold of his inheritance, for his mother had managed and grown his estate since her husband had been killed in a hunting accident 20 years before. That estate was enormous. It comprised mostly upland farms across the counties of North Wales here, but some good agricultural land in Denbighshire and Shropshire, and a growing mineral income from coal, lead and copper. His main seat, he had about half a dozen other houses, is up here at Wynnstay, marked in orange. And that's between Wrexham and Oswestry, and the nearest big town is Chester, which was about 18 miles away, and which in those days was still a port. His income grew during the course of his lifetime from £20,000 a year in 1770 to 27,000 a year in 1789, the year in which he died. And that's a fantastic amount of money. Translating historic values into contemporary ones is almost impossible, but arguably it's the equivalent of about £35 million today. Here's an idealized impression of his world. This is a painting called A View near Wynnstay, which is now in New Haven. And it was painted by the Welsh landscape painter Richard Wilson in 1770. It was one of two commissions by Sir Watkin. You've got the River Dee in the foreground, which skirted his park, and then the conical hill in the distance is Dinas Bran above Llangollen. He married very young in March 1769 at the age of 19. His bride was Henrietta Somerset, a daughter of the Duke of Beaufort, and here they are, again painted by Reynolds in a rather bad portrait in the National Museum of Wales, in Van Dyck masquerade dress, holding theatrical masks. However, this marriage only lasted 4 months, as she died that July. On the left is the 28-piece Rococo silver gilt toilet service given to her by Sir Watkin's mother. This is actually a rather old-fashioned thing, both functionally and stylistically, but it's an incredibly ambitious social statement, as it was made by the Royal Goldsmith Thomas Hemming and is a repeat of a service made a couple of years before for George III's sister, Queen Caroline Matilda. So the Williams-Wynns were definitely not backwoods country squires. Sir Watkin loved the theatre. He was a friend of David Garrick and of Sheridan. And on the right, you have a massive portrait of Garrick painted by Nathaniel Dance in 1771, which is now in Stratford-on-Avon, which used to hang in Sir Watkin's drawing room. He was also a gifted amateur musician and a significant patron of music. And on the left is his personal Welsh harpist, Blind John Parry. More than anything, though, he had a strong feel for the visual arts. On the left, another very large painting by Pompeo Bertoni, painted in Rome in 1769, which is an allegory of his love of painting, music and literature. He's seen here with two of his grand tour companions. And on the right, another Reynolds, and here's Sir Watkin at a meeting of the Society of Dilettanti. He's wearing the red toga of the president for the evening. And it's the meeting where Sir Watkin's friend, Sir William Hamilton, was introduced. And Sir Watkin is gesturing at him. And then in front of them is de Hankeville's catalogue of Hamilton's first vase collection. And in all, Sir Watkin was to commission works of art from at least 25 painters and sculptors during these years. Then in December 1771, he makes another very grand marriage, and his new wife, Charlotte, was a Grenville from Stowe in Buckinghamshire, whose father, George Grenville, was briefly Prime Minister in the 1760s. She was very young, just 17 years old when she was married, and the rather unkind description of her at the bottom is from her aunt, Lady Temple. The Temples are actually thrilled by this marriage, and they go on in their letters about how gloriously rich she was, which I think is quite something. These pastels are in effect their wedding portraits made a month later by Hugh Douglas Hamilton. And the marriage seems to have been a successful one. lasting until his death in 1789, and she was to live on until 1832. Their main seat was Wynnstay, which you see here. This began as an early 17th century half-timbered courtyard house, two sides of which had been rebuilt in yellow sandstone by Francis Smith of Warwick in 1736 to 38. And Sir Watkin added this little wing here in 1770. He actually wanted to rebuild the whole place and commissioned plans from 8 different architects, but he'd only just begun to do so under the direction of James Wyatt when he died in 1789. This lower view is by Paul Sandby, who acted as his drawing master for a number of years in the 1770s and knew Wynnstay very well. Sadly, the house doesn't survive because it was burnt down in 1858. So Watkin and Charlotte Williams-Wynn usually came to Wynnstay in the autumn of each year and remained there until after Christmas, when they went to London until July. In London, they lived initially at number 2 Grosvenor Square, but in 1771, Sir Watkin bought the freehold of a house in St James's Square, which you see here. And this is an engraving of about 1750. And this big 8-bay building here is Norfolk House, whose celebrated music room is in the Victoria and Albert Museum. So Watkin's plot was just out of this view, approximately here, more or less opposite Norfolk House. And here it is, now known as number 20 St James's Square. He'd bought the house always intending to rebuild, and Robert Adam who'd already produced unexecuted designs for Wynnstay, was given the job of his architect. The entrance facade he produced for Wynn House is a sophisticated neoclassical composition in white Portland stone, which would have stood out strikingly against the brick houses on either side. It was to be described at the time as one of the best houses in London, and it figures prominently in the self-promotional volume Works in Architecture, published by Robert and James Adam in 1779. This also includes the floor plans of the 2 main floors of this 4-storey house. It was part of a terrace with a relatively narrow front of only about 45 feet. And you'll note the principal rooms on each floor have got these semicircular apsed ends. On the ground floor here, this is the dining room and the music room. And then on the first floor up the main staircase, you've got a circuit of drawing rooms. And then the family rooms were to the side, to the rear, and the kitchen in the basement. The house survives, though without public access. It was astonishingly expensive to build, costing nearly £50,000, and Sir Watkin could have bought a standard West End terrace house of comparable size for about £10,000 at this date. And indeed, his finances never quite recovered from the expense of building Wynn House, into which they moved in May 1775. This is the dining room, photographed in the 1930s, when the house was being used as corporate offices. The room is in fact not all that large. It measures 26 by 28 feet, but as you can see, it's very richly decorated. It has a screen of Corinthian columns at one end where the wall curves, and there's a central door leading into the music room. The ceiling is molded with a repeating pattern of octagons, and originally the room was painted grey, light blue, and white. Unlike the other furniture in this room, in the photograph, the mirror is the original one, and its glass plate, 97 by 63 inches, was one of several specially imported from France. No sheets of glass that large being made in Britain at that date. You'll also note how ram's heads are a decorative motif throughout the room, on the brackets of the fireplace, on the architrave of the doors, and up here in the Corinthian columns, because we'll be seeing those again. This is how the room was furnished when Sir Watkin died in 1789. I'm not going to read it out for you, but you'll see that it begins with the two crimson draw-up window curtains, one of the few notes of colours in the room, the big pier glass over the fireplace that I've been talking about, 9 paintings in gilt frames, which I think probably included the Richard Wilson landscape I showed you, a large sideboard flanked by vases on pedestals with a bottle system below, 18 chairs covered in red leather, probably arranged around the walls when the inventory was taken, a turkey carpet which covered almost the entire floor area, a hearth rug, a circular mahogany pier table, which I think must have been in the apse, a polished steel grate, fire irons and fender, 2 tripods for candle stands, a small dining table in the middle of the room, and then also there was a larger set of mahogany dining tables with oval ends, 16 foot long and 6 foot wide, kept at the bottom of the staircase hall outside. The Adam brothers were to impose a complete stylistic unity throughout their interiors, and as well as designing the room's ceiling, architraves, fireplace, grate and door furniture, they also provided drawings for the architectural furniture, the large mahogany sideboard, carved and painted frame, the 2 vases on pedestals richly carved and painted with cocks and cisterns to wash glasses, and the oval mahogany bottle cistern richly carved and painted frame, though the frame is no longer painted, which you see here in the National Museum of Wales, with just the legs of the Botany portrait above. The silver gilt punch bowl was one of the pieces of plate that stood on that sideboard. That too was designed by Robert Adam in 1771 and is a prize for the Chester races, and costs the Watkin a total of £185. The dining room led into the music room, which contained this 4-metre high chamber organ, now in the National Museum, whose case is crowned with medallion of Handel, Sir Watkin's favourite composer, and dinners at Wynn House seem often to have been accompanied by music. So what was on the dining table? Silver, as one would expect, because silver dinner services comprising plates, dishes, and so on, all of similar appearance.
It seems that we may have lost a little bit of connection with Oliver, so apologies for that. It's true that he mentioned that his connection may be a little bit of an issue this evening. So let's see if we can get Oliver back again. Just apologies, and let's hope that Oliver can join us at the moment. So if you bear with us for a couple of moments, I'm just going to try to contact him. Thank you. If you want to continue, Oliver, thank you.
Thank you very much, Felix, and my apologies, everybody. I was talking about the architectural furniture for the dining room at Wynn House, and I'd just begun, I think, to talk about what was on the table. As you would expect, there was a large silver dinner service, a complete dinner service of dishes, plates, tureens, sauceplates, and so on, required several thousand ounces of silver. So these were the preserved of the very wealthy. And many patrons crept towards the service over several years, gradually buying pieces of similar standard design. Sir Watkin, however, and can I have the next slide, please, did not creep. he commissioned a brand new silver dinner service. Keep going. This is what the service comprised. 6 big meat dishes, 15 or 16 oval dishes, and 12 round dishes, all in graduated sizes. 84 plates, together with 4 tureens, 12 sauce boats, and 8 salts, plus 16 dessert dishes. And the service cost over £2,400. He also had Robert Adam design new shapes for each element, as you see here. And this must have significantly increased the cost, not only the £50 paid for the drawings for the silver, but also because the maker of the service would have required new casting patterns and molds. And here are some of the designs which are in Sir John Soane's museum for the small tureen and a larger tureen below it, for the sauce boats and for the salts. And you'll note that the ram's heads and husk and patra on the silver echoes those in the room itself. Next, please. And here are the corresponding pieces. The service was sold in 1946, so bits of it are all over the place now. The larger tureen at the top is in Cardiff. The smaller tureen at the top is in Cardiff. The larger one below it was passed through Christie's, New York, about 15 years ago, and is probably still in an American private collection. There's a pair of sauce boats in the V&A, another pair in Cardiff, and one of the salts is in the Castle Museum in Nottingham. Next, please. The service was commissioned through a retailer of silver and ormolu in the Strand called Joseph Cresswell, and made by the manufacturing silversmith John Carter. Here we have the two of the oval serving dishes and some of the dessert dishes. These were only gilded in the 19th century. And on the right is a design for the 3-branch candelabra that stood on the candle stands that I showed you. 4 of these were made, and they now belong to Lloyd's of London. In all, Sir Watkin spent about £4,500 on table silver during the 1770s, including cutlery and teaware. However, there were drawbacks to eating off silver. It was noisy with the clatter of cutlery, and the metal conducts heat from the food, and it also scratches easily. The most practical everyday alternative was, of course, the Chinese hard-paste porcelain. Next, please. Imported in large quantities by the East India Company, which was relatively inexpensive and quite durable. In May 1771, Sir Watkin bought a complete table service of Nankeen china, consisting of 2 tureens, 18 oblong dishes, 4 salad dishes, 4 sauce boats, 4 salts, 6½ dozen plates, 3 dozen soup plates, costing only £26 5 from the China dealer Thomas Williams, corner of St James's Street in Pall Mall. And this sadly is not it, because it doesn't survive, but we can assume that it would have been something like this one. And it was definitely blue and white, I think, because in 1775, the same Thomas Williams supplied 4 Worcester china boats to go with the old Nankeen service. While Chinese porcelain was readily available, the import of European ceramics for resale was illegal until 1775, and wares acquired abroad for private use was subject to import duty and shipping costs. Despite these obstacles, Sir Watkin bought at least 2 table services of European soft-paste porcelain. The first one came from Thomas Morgan, corner of Arlington Street in Piccadilly. Next, please. Who, despite the import ban, was London's principal dealer in French and German porcelain. And that was the service described here, which was from Tournai, purchased for £54.17 in June 1770. Although Tournai had recently become part of the Austrian Netherlands, I think we can count its porcelains as culturally French, as 2 of the original partners had worked in Meissen and Villeroy. Sir Watkin's Tournai service is also lost, but it too was probably blue and white. Later, Lady Williams-Wynn thought that she could match the pattern with calfly, so it may perhaps have been a sprig design of some sort. Bottom of the screen, a typical Tournai blue and white service or collection of plates at least. And at the top of the screen, some plates the FPS saw at Petworth a few years ago, which I think may have been Chantilly rather than Tournai, but an example of another elite purchaser buying European blue and white in preference to English wares or Chinese. While in Paris in February 1769, Sir Watkin had visited the Sèvres factory, where he bought a small dessert service for his prospective mother-in-law, the Duchess of Beaufort. Soon afterwards, he appears to have bought a much larger service for himself. Next, please. This service was at Wynn House in by the 1880s. No earlier inventory of itemizes the porcelain there. Unfortunately, it's described in some detail in an inventory of 1906. This tells us that the service was decorated with a vivid blue turquoise ribbon interlaced with bouquets of flowers in true colors. And secondly, and crucially, that it bore the date letters for 1769 and 1770. There seems indeed to have been a brief vogue for this pattern, next please, in Britain during the early 1770s. There is the service at Knowle, also with the date letters 1769 to 1770, apparently sold to the 3rd Duke of Dorset in late 1770, and that at Petworth sold to the 3rd Earl of Egremont in 1774. And then there was another one formerly at Castle Howard as well, bought at much the same date. The service at 20 St James's Square in 1906 cannot be the Knowle one, and it must, in David Peters's opinion, be the only other one known to have been made in 1769 and 70. And that service is Peters 69-9, acquired by the banker Jean-Baptiste Buffo in December 1769, probably for Madame du Barry. She may never have used it, as it was superseded by the celebrated service with her DB monogram. And according to a contemporary list of her purchases from Sèvres, it passed back to Buffo pour l'Angleterre. A small supplement to the service was purchased under du Barry's name in October 1770, and a much larger one, together with a matching tea service, was bought by Buffo in December of that year. And that supplement is listed by David as 1770, number 8. Allowing for some losses, the composition of the service at St James's Square in 1906 corresponds closely to 69-9 and its 2 supplements. Next, please. I'm obviously extremely grateful to David for his help with this identification, and I should stress that this remains research in progress, as so far the only trace of the service in Sir Watkin's personal accounts is a couple of small payments in connection with the Sèvres china arriving at the London Customs House in 1770. But this isn't the Duchess of Beaufort's service, because that's already gone through the Customs House a few months earlier. However, a payment on this scale, which must have been several hundred or even nearly £1,000, would have been made through a bank rather than in cash. The service was still in the Williams-Wynn family in the early 1950s, and a major part of it was sold at Sotheby's in November 1985, and then again in Zurich in December of 1991. Did the turquoise ribbon pattern perhaps help inspire the dining room's blue, grey and white colour scheme? We'll probably never know. Next, please. Williams-Wynn also acquired a number of dessert services. This one here from Meissen was bought again from Thomas Morgan in 1770. And as you see, it cost £94 10 shillings. And that can be compared with the £21 that Wynn paid for a Derby dessert service, and again, another £21 for a Worcester one decorated in London by James Giles. And you'll see that neither the Sèvres table service nor the Meissen dessert service included figures. Next, please. However, Thomas Morgan stocked figures. These appear in the stock sale that he held at Christie's in 1772, and also in his trade account at Sèvres. He was the only London dealer, incidentally, to have a trade account at the factory. And his shop was on the corner of Arlington Street in Piccadilly, marked with the star in orange, and here with a blue star is 20 St James's Square, about 5 minutes walk away. Next, please. Also in June 1770, Williams-Wynn bought from Morgan 21 biscuit figures and groups for £34.13. Were these served? I think very probably, though I know he also bought some Derby biscuit figures later on. And shown here, just as representative examples, a couple of pastoral groups from around 1770, La Bergère des Alpes and La Vache. More Sèvres figures may have followed in January 1772, when he paid Mr. Morgan for an addition to the Sèvres china at Wynnstay and for 3 dozen Tournai cups, also several groups of dessert biscuit figures, etc., a total of £63. And then a puzzling entry in July 1776, he paid Morgan for an addition to the large dessert china and for 2 French umbrellas, another £67.18. I think the umbrellas were not things to keep the rain off, but may have been arbors for the dessert table. And we know that in 1778, one Edward Stevens, a carver and gilder, was paid £16.17 for dessert frames sent to Wynnstay. And in an inventory of that house in 1790, the biscuit ornaments for the dessert, which were quite numerous, were stored with coloured sand, spangles, gold leaf, and coloured paper and moulds to make table centres. Next, please, we have payments for 2 table services, tea services bought from Morgan, and the blue and green tea service, the blue and gold tea service could have been decorated in blue cameo, or perhaps it had a blue ground colour, I don't know. Wynnstay indeed was well supplied with European and Chinese porcelain for tea and coffee. The next is a watercolour by one of Sir Watkin's friends, the amateur artist Henry Bunbury, which shows the party at Wynnstay. Here's Sir Watkin being rebuked by one of the footmen for being late in coming to have coffee. Coffee is quite ready, gentlemen. Turning to Wynnstay, next please. When the Williams-Wynns were there, they entertained lavishly, holding balls, masquerades, and concerts, and even bigger dinners than in London. Dining room there no longer exists, the house having been burnt out, but it could seat 20 people, and we know it was panelled and had a fireplace at each end, so it probably resembled the dining room at Ombersley Court, another Francis Smith house of similar size, which you can see on the lower left. And Sir Watkin also added a large assembly room at Wynnstay in 1770, which would have accommodated at least 40, I think. And you'll see that that room too, in an early 19th century watercolour in the V&A, had the chamber organ at one end. And as in London, meals at Wynnstay were often accompanied by music. These could be very grand affairs too, as one commentator wrote, setting aside royal and ducal entertainments, I neither know nor have I seen such a display of servants and plate as was seen in the dining room at Wynnstay on gala days. So what was on the table in the country? Well, at least some silver was brought up from Denbighshire when the household left London, but the porcelain services didn't travel. What was used at Tournai, and what was used at Wynnstay, it would seem from the 1790 inventory, was the Tournai table service, lots of other Tournai, and the jars decorated Worcester dessert service, together with Nankeen blue and white porcelains and some blue-edged Staffordshire creamwares, Next, please. As well as giving dinners at Wynnstay, they also hosted much larger parties, some of them al fresco affairs in the park for hundreds of guests. Most notably for Sir Watkin's coming of age in 1770, for which they bought industrial quantities of Wedgwood creamware, over 400 serving dishes, 850 plates, nearly 200 soup plates, 32 tureens, and so on, costing over £100. And these events were extraordinarily well planned and organized. The printed ticket top, oh, well, you won't be able to see this, but the printed ticket at the top on the right with a red ribbon was the mark of a guest who actually got to dine in the house on that occasion. And the one below it is for an outdoor feast held in 1784 to mark the completion of a new dam in the new lake in the Capability Brown Design Park. So Watkin also had his own well-equipped private theatre and presented plays every January, acted by the family, their friends, and some of their servants. And these were performed to an invited audience of up to 300 people who were entertained to supper afterwards. On the right is a ticket for the 1782 season of Wynnstay plays, depicting the theatre itself and stamped in an organised way with the date and the number. Next, please. Almost like a European aristocrat, Sir Watkin even attempted to set up a ceramic manufacture of his own. And this was run, in as far as it was run at all, by the Anglo-French modeler Jean Voyez. And we know very little about it, other than the pottery was mentioned in a couple of letters. Tell Mr. Evans, who was one of his surveyors, I'm very anxious to hear how the pottery goes on, and they must make their wares much thinner and not so yellow. And then in 1789, things have ground to a halt, and the thrower has run away. Something, however, was made, and on the right here is a jug molded with the fair Hebe pattern, which is stamped Voyez, and also, as you see bottom right, Sir W. Bart. And I think this backs up must be not just an ownership mark. Although this enterprise failed, it's not as bonkers as it might sound, in fact, because there were already supplies of coal and Cornish clays could be brought by sea to Chester. Was Sir Watkin personally a connoisseur of ceramics? I think he probably was, and that his tastes were actually established before he married in December 1771, so they're his rather than hers. And documented purchases of ceramic and glass come to over £1,000 during this 5-year period. However, we should put the money spent on tablewares in context. Can I have the last, please? This creamware mug celebrates the Montgomeryshire parliamentary elections of 1774, which Sir Watkin's nominee lost, despite Wynnstay spending nearly £5,000 on the campaign, which was a sum equal to his total expenditure on table silver. Nor was it to be long life to Sir W. Wynn, as the mug proclaims. He grew very fat, as Gilray's cartoon of him on the right would suggest. Contemporaries indeed said that the kitchen was to be his worst enemy, and he died aged just 40 in July 1789. However, his accounts and the objects they describe are important, as they show lots of things, but in particular how some elite British consumers during this period were prioritizing European porcelains over English wares. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oliver, for this amazing lecture. It has been a great case study, actually, to understand a little bit better the ways British aristocrats used to use and collect porcelain and furnish their dinner tables. So we have seen the whole process from the creation of the house to the commissioning of different dinner services. And it has been really insightful. And I'm sure we're going to have lots of questions related to all the different topics that could be unpinned after your lecture. So thanks very much. I was going to ask you if you would want to put your video on, just in case if you wanted.
Oh, yes.
That we don't have it at the moment, so that we can look at some of these questions. But just before, I wanted to announce our next event that is going to be on Saturday the 13th and Sunday the 14th of March. And it's going to be a symposium that we have prepared at the French Porcelain Society with Patricia Ferguson in it. And it's going to be a wonderful tour of 8 different castles or castle museums with their curators. And they're going to be showing us around from the Palacio Nacional da Ajuda in Lisbon, Charlottenburg, the Neues Place, the Belvedere in Berlin, also Woburn Abbey, the Governor's Palace in Colonial Williamsburg. We're also going to go to Versailles, to Schloss Wilhelmshöhe, and to Waterstone Manor as well. So we really hope that you can join us in 2 weekends time and enjoy this symposium. So now let's have a look at some of the questions that have been arriving. I saw the first one earlier on, that was a very direct one. What were gala days?
Sorry, say that again, Felix.
What were gala days when you referred to the gala days that Sir Watkin celebrated?
Oh, gala. I think it just refers to any sort of major celebration. I mean, they had, for example, concerts and masquerades, balls and things of that sort. So it was when they were giving a large party for a couple of dozen people.
Good, thank you. We have a question from Jeffrey Ruda, who is congratulating you for the lecture, and he says, to what extent were ornamental ceramics places outside the dining room? Did the households have separate tables for dinner and dessert services, or did they take time to change the settings?
I've wondered about that. I think in 20 St. James's Square, where you've got the music room connecting with the dining room, that would seem a place where one could withdraw while the dessert was being set out. So that seemed to me a possibility at any rate.
Yeah, true. Thank you. We have another question from Diana Darlington, who is asking, any thoughts on the maker of the mug just shown? So I suppose is the mug on your last slide with a nice comment. I don't know if that comment is a pun, it has double meaning, or I'm talking about the round health of Sir Watkin, or not really?
The fox on the top of it is off his coat of arms, so that's what that's doing. I don't think we know. I mean, we have given it some thought, and I think I was defeated by that in the end.
I see. Well, it's a very interesting object, and definitely very different, sorry, to the more elegant dinner services that we have been seeing that Sir Watkin had. We have more questions here and more messages. So a question from Rachel Conroy, who is asking, how does from the Watkin Williams-Wynn's dining set became part of the Nottingham's collection? Do you know the location of any others?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the question.
How was it that the salt went to form part of Nottingham's collection? I suppose.
The Williams-Wynns had a silver cell at Sèvres in 1946, and the Adams service was not sold as a service. It was broken up, and there was nothing to indicate that the salts and sauce boats and so on, other than they were the same maker in the same year, went with it. So there was it, and 1946, of course, was not a good time to be selling things either. So it sold comparatively cheaply and was all over the place. And the salt, or two salts in Nottingham, were given to the Castle Museum, I think, by a silver collector some years later, who'd obviously had them for a few years and passed them on.
So that was a very lucky for Nottingham collection.
Yeah, but they are interesting on being supported on those Adolph's dolphins, and it's quite. I mean, it's a common neoclassical device, but it's quite an early use of it.
And they're beautiful. They're beautifully designed. We have another question here from Chris Riddle, who is asking, do any of the Coley replacement pieces still exist?
That was referring to the Tournai service, and Charlotte Williams-Wynn asks her steward to send up from Wynnstay, where the service was kept, to London, a plate and a dish, so that she can she knows she can match the pattern at Carfley, but she wants a plate and a dish to make sure that the shapes correspond as well.
I see. Thank you. Another question now asking about the entertainment entry tickets. Do you have a reference for those? Where are they found?
Yeah, there are lots of them. I took those from the British Museum. If you search for Williams-Wynn in the search box in the British Museum collections bit of the website, you come up with a lot of stuff, but including examples of the theatre tickets. We have some in Cardiff as well, but that's the most accessible way of getting to see them.
Perfect, thank you.
A lot of them were designed by Henry Bunbury, who was responsible for that cartoon of them being late for coffee that I showed at the end.
And it was a great cartoon, actually. It talks very much about the increased popularity of these drinks and how it was part of the daily life of aristocrats, sort of routinely having tea and coffee and so on, and having conversations around the table. We have a very interesting comment from Nicola Samuels, who is saying that she had to, she could visit number 20 St. James's nearly 20 years ago and was amazed at the coordinated designs. And she says that she has color pictures of it. So, well, just for your information, Oliver, in case you are interested.
Yes, I went there once only, at the point when I bought the 4-meter high chamber organ that I briefly showed, which was removed from the house in 1864 and moved up to Wynnstay, the rebuilt Wynnstay after the fire. And you could still see on the skirting boards at 20 St James's Square where it had been removed, which is one of those extraordinary moments. The house was somewhat damaged in the Second World War, but the main public rooms at the front escaped pretty well unscathed. And it was, having been corporate offices, it was sold in, I think, 2015, most recently, and is a private house again, but not the sort of private house I imagine that one will ever get into.
Yes, I'm a very lucky person who may be able to get a private house. We have a question from Tessa Murdoch, who is wondering where was the Jean Voyer short-lived manufactory? Was it in Chester?
I think it was actually at Wynnstay itself. I mean, this is all still work in progress, but there was a tile manufactory and a brickworks there in the 19th century. The estate accounts for the late 1780s, which I've yet to go through, little matter of a pandemic, may throw some light on that. But if one thinks of the fact that there's ready availability of coal locally, and the white pipe clays from the west of England are being shipped to the Staffordshire potteries anyway by sea, and they're coming in through Liverpool and even still through Chester at this date, and the canal system is beginning to spread out. I think it was probably at Wynnstay itself. That's something we need to do some more work on, really.
It would be very interesting to know more about, because we, as we saw on our last lecture, we know of other European aristocrats who had their almost private porcelain factory. So it would be also very interesting to know more about this case here.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really think of anything much else like it. I mean, there's a certain amount of patronage, I suppose, notably Rockingham, that took the Rockingham name, but those two letters do sort of suggest some direct personal involvement, which I find surprising.
Yeah, exactly. We have another question from Errol Manas, who is asking, were subsequent members of the family notable collectors?
Of his three sons, two of them were also collectors. His elder son, who was the next Sir Watkin Williams-Wynn, and also his younger son as well. And they were both quite notable collectors of pictures. And that Sir Watkin turns up at the Sèvres factory in 1816 and purchases from the factory. So yes, they were to some extent. What happened to them was that they had 3 lots of death duties just after the Second World War, which and pretty well all the art collections were sold after that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Philip Williams is asking if, well, he's saying, Sir Watkin bought a great deal from Josiah Wedgwood, and did he patronize any other Staffordshire potters?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, he does seem to have had some sort of relationship with Wedgwood. I mean, he was one of that small group of rich patrons that Wedgwood tried hard to cultivate. But for example, he passed on to Wedgwood a copy of Hamilton's First Vase catalogue, and he was a very early purchaser of Wedgwood Etruscan wares, and indeed Wedgwood Etruscan vases are really about the only ornamental ceramics that he ever bought, because his inventories are remarkably shy of ornamental porcelain of any kind.
Yeah, thank you. I think we are getting towards the end of the Q&A. There are lots of comments and lots of questions, but I am going to combine 2 interesting ones. One from Bruce Ackers, who is asking, why are you so sure that Lady Williams-Wynn played little role in the choice of services? And also somehow related, Anne is asking that Sir Watkin, he seems not to have commissioned a unique service and only bought what was available. What do you have to say about that, Oliver?
In ceramics, yes, that's certainly the case. I mean, the silver service, on the other hand, was a unique commission, and apart from the Duke of Northumberland, no other Adam patron does anything quite like that. So and the drawings for the service, you know, were another £50, which is a lot to spend on a sequence of designs.
Almost as much as one of the services that he already bought. I think it was the Tournai service was around that price, wasn't it, or something similar?
Mm.
Well, we could be here the rest of the evening, really, with so many questions coming up and lots of messages saying thank you very much. So thank you very much again, Oliver. I'm just going to goodbye.
Can I just say that?
Yeah, sure.
Can I just say that I'd be happy to deal with any questions directly if you'd like to send if you anything you'd like to send on to me, that would be fine.
That is very generous of you. Thank you, Oliver. So if you have Oliver's email address, of course, please contact him. But if you don't, you can always contact us and we will forward Oliver all of your queries. And thank you very much again for being here this evening. And thank you very much, Oliver. This has been a great lecture, and I think we all have learned quite a great deal about Sir Watkins. And we hope to see you next time on our symposium in March. So have a great evening and see you soon. Goodbye.